That's a really good question. For me, I have always been somewhat of a spiritual person. And for me, like the way that I envision illness or dis-ease, I don't love to call it that, but any dis-ease has the physical stuff, the symptoms that go with it. But it's also going to bring with it a certain set of emotional states that are specific with that illness, right? So um, there are lots of writers who have written about this type of like, oh, if you have knee pain, it means XYZ thing. Um, so there is this piece that we're aware of, which is our mind is impacting our body, and our body is then in turn impacting our mind. And then our spirit is, if for the spiritual people out there, it's like our spirit is here to experience things that help us to grow as a spirit. That's my belief system. So for me, it's like, sure, I could go and be a doctor, like a regular, conventional doctor, but that's not on a spiritual level. Like that wasn't what was calling me because that's not my path in life. And since becoming a naturopathic doctor and like thousands of hours of meditation and stuff, I would say like I can remember like past lives when I was a witch, like an herbalist, kind of like earth medicine doctor for villages. So I obviously like this resonates more because it was so entrenched, I think, in like what I had already been doing in previous existences. Because I went down this rabbit hole of research and literally like everything that I had learned, even in unconventional medical school, was that fertility drops off of a cliff at 35. So we didn't get any different messages in naturopathic medical school as our conventional counterparts. And as I dove into the research, I was like, wait a second, there's so much I can do to support my fertility before I'm ready to have a child. I never learned about any of those things. And if I followed this rabbit hole of age, it actually traced back to a myth that came out of churches in France in the 1800s that correlated the fact that women were not less numbers of women were bringing their children to get baptized after the age of 35. And they correlated that to declining fertility at 35. So when I connected all of the pieces, it was like, wait a second, why are we lying to people? Like, this is not based in any science. This is bullshit. Like, total BS to walk away with this like, I was angry. Like, honestly, I was just so irate. I was like, I can't believe that people have told me these lies for my entire life. And those lies continue to this day. 10 years later, we're still saying the same shit, which is fertility drops off of a cliff at 35.
And so
And
many people would be happy to hear you say that's so bullshit because
yeah.
everybody gets told that, and it is really frustrating for sure. So
Yeah, and it's really like disempowering to hear that message
totally
because we can't do anything about age. We are
right.
going to age no matter what. Like every year we're going to be 1 year older. Period.
Yeah.
Like that's the reality of our life. But what gets super discounted is that there's things that you can do to prevent ovarian aging, which is very different from your biological age.
Mm-hmm.
And there are practices to just help you sustain your fertility for longer that can support you to have a child when you're ready with the right person. So that really became the core of what I was passionate about, was like women and the messages we give women, and how do we take actual science, not BS from churches, but like actual legitimate science, and make it popular and make it like empowering so that women can then say, and this is not to say like, sure, you can do whatever the heck you want and you'll be fine. You can have a baby at 40. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you have strategy around it and you're really specific and intentional about how you're living your life and what you're doing, you can absolutely decide to wait till later in life to have kids. And I was like, man, it's taken a decade to meet and like commit to this person. Is it going to take me another decade to find the other person? So it's really interesting. But I also think that a lot of these, like, I have other women in my practice who share very similar stories, and they're like, oh my God, that was my story too. Like, I left this person and then I met the love of my life. And there's something to that of like, and like any of my close friends were like, oh, that's a rebound relationship. That's not going to last. And, and that's like, so many of us think that, but the number of women that I've met that are like, oh no, I was in this like terrible relationship. I decided like the right thing for me was to leave. And then I met the love of my life and we're married to this day and we have an amazing relationship, right? Like, so I feel like there is something to it, and maybe not every relationship after a serious one is a rebound, right? It might be a more serious relationship.
Totally. How did you meet your husband? Your now husband?
Online.
So
Online
2 weeks later,
dating.
you were just online dating. What app was it? Let's talk about what app was it.
Do we have to say it on?
Oh, you don't have to. Yeah, of
no,
course,
no, no.
yeah.
I'm like an open book. I tell everyone everything. So,
Okay, cool.
it was Tinder.
Yeah. You know how many people I know who have met their partners on Tinder? It's amazing. People are like, oh,
it's
the hookup app. No, not so much.
It's surprising. And what's also surprising is a lot of my male friends were like, hey, what are you doing on Tinder? Because I like showed up in their profiles and they're like, why are you on there? What is going on with you? And like legitimately concerned. And I was like, what? Did I miss something? And sure
Yeah.
enough, like I was with my ex for so many years that I had no idea, never been on Tinder before, and literally like got on Tinder, went on a few dates that were horrendous because they were coming from this like hookup, like we're just hooking up thing. And I was like, oh gosh. And everyone around me was like, you realize you're on a hookup app, right? Like you're not really looking for a relationship on a hookup app. And I was like, I don't know. I'm just like putting myself out there and seeing what happens. I've been noticing lately, I've been tracking my cycles. And what I just came to the realization a couple of days ago was like, oh, I'm in the phase of cycle where I do not want to be on social media. I'm not creating content, but I know that that time is coming. So there's this like inward phase where I don't expect me to be on social and showing up 3 times a day and doing all this stuff. And then there's a time in my cycle when it actually makes the most sense. It's aligned to my energies, it's aligned to my hormones, and I can actually show up more powerfully, more fulfilling for me as well as for the people that are in the tribe. So it's really interesting to, I'm like, oh, this is really neat. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have to force myself to do the things just to do the things, but I can really like say, yeah, that's not for me right now. And that's okay. Like, it's okay to take breaks from social. It's okay to not post 3 times a day when you're menstruating. It's like all of those things. But the messages that we get from society are coming from the masculine paradigm, which
Mm-hmm.
again, if you follow those guys, they're like, oh, you have to post 3 times a day to like build a following and blah blah blah. So we as women are like, okay, great, that's what I need to do, so I'm going to force myself to do it. But like if we're really moving with the feminine, it's coming from a creative force. It's coming when it's in alignment with our hormones, and that's not every single day of the month. And that applies to everything. Like if you're writing a book, you may not be writing 30 days a month. You may only be writing 6 or 7, but you're going to be more productive when you're in that place of alignment and zone, rather than forcing yourself to sit down and write when you don't need to be.
I know that you specialize in fertility, and I want to talk a little bit about all the things you were just talking about with our menstrual cycle and our seasons. How does this affect our fertility? And you also mentioned that a lot of doctors concentrate on the body, but your approach is concentrating on mind body healing methods.
Mm-hmm,
So what are
mm-hmm.
some things that may be affecting our fertility that we may not even consider?
Well, from the mind body perspective, I would say the first thing is this masculine energy, right? And like most of my clients are badass women who are now suddenly struggling with fertility. Like, is it a surprise? No, because at the core of it, fertility is feminine energy, right? Like, at the very basic level, the ability for us to carry a child or receive a child has to do with how open are we to receiving. So if we are the badass that is like, I can do it all myself, I don't need help, I'm good, I don't need your support, we have literally like put aside the feminine energy and instead move into our masculine, which is all about like, I got this, I don't need you. Um, but we really do, like, fertility really needs someone else, right? So it is this like sudden shift, or not so sudden sometimes, but we're not necessarily thinking about it. So we move through our entire life like, oh, I'm going to do, and I have this PhD and I have this degree and that training. And we have spent our entire life going out and getting it, whatever the it is that we wanted, that we never really learn to get into that feminine energy where we can receive. So once we start trying to have a child, we go about it the same way. Like, what do I need to do? What supplements do I need to take? What hormones do I need to fix? What IVF treatment should I go to? These are all the string of questions that most women are asking, but we never pause to think like, if I go about this the same way that I have literally went about my whole life, and I never pause to say, how do I receive? How am I going to receive this child? Is my body in a receptive state to receive a child? Those are the questions that I'm encouraging people to ask, because those are the things, that's the energy shift that's going to help support fertility. That's not the only thing. I'm not saying like sit and meditate and you'll have a child. But that is, it is part of it. And that energy shift, when the energy shifts, there's a distinct shift that I can feel in our clients, that I'm like, okay, cool. They have embraced their feminine. We're good. Like, they're going to go and get pregnant, without a doubt. And it's almost always true, because they are now in the state of, they've just moved from worry, anxiety, stress, sadness, grief, whatever chain of emotions that was brought about by trying to control their fertility, control their hormones. they've just shifted into, hey, my hormones are actually balanced. I know how to understand them. I know what's happening in each part of my cycle. I know how to move in cohort with that. I'm going to have a very different experience in my body. And my hormones are going to respond to that and be more in balance. So that, like the mind body piece, that's the biggest thing. And I have a crap ton of tools that we use to help women shift out of the masculine into the feminine. It's like the subtle message that's happening all the time.
So how much does our, like what we eat and what we put in our body and the way we treat our body and our mind, all of the things you've just mentioned, how do they work together? And if, like, let's say we nail this mind stuff, but we're still like eating crap and drinking heaps of booze,
Yeah.
how does that play out?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I was just saying to one of my clients who's also a doctor, that she was doing some mind body stuff. And I was like, okay, so are you going to go to a homeopath, or like what kind of mind body person? And she was like, yeah, so I'm going to go to this healer person, who doesn't really believe in all of the food supplements, all of the things that I'm doing. And
Okay.
I was like, yeah, that's pretty common, because there is a tendency for the spiritual realm, or like the mind realm, to believe that the mind over body, mind over matter, right? This idea that one is more important than the other.
Right.
But really, like, mind, body, spirit medicine for me is like all three are equal. And we have to get all of them in alignment, and they need to be all individualized to each person. So there's no template for this. There's no like, if you do these things, you're on the right path. It's more like, is your diet the right diet for you? Or is it causing you a bunch of inflammation that now your body has to compensate for? Is it, the biggest question I get all the time is like, should I continue drinking coffee, or will I have to quit? And I'm like, no, you don't, not everybody needs to quit coffee. Like, coffee is not the enemy. It's, when do you consume it? Is it right for you? Is it doing you more harm than good? Let's actually figure out, is this in alignment for you or not? And it's always moving from this place of alignment with your body, mind, and spirit. And once we figure those pieces out, then we are asking different questions, right? So diet definitely has a significant role to play. I believe that it's a good foundation is set on good diet practices, but there's no like perfect diet that helps with fertility. You know, like there's, I was just looking it up yesterday. There's like the fertility diet, and I was like, yeah, that's bullshit.
Interesting. Okay.
Because there is no fertility diet. Every person, like literally every client that I've ever seen, has gotten a different diet from me. So
Right. Interesting.
you like, some people, kale might be their enemy, whereas other people like, hey, eat lots of kale.
So it's really
so
a
there's
case by case thing. So if someone comes to you after 35 and they're freaking out, they're like, my biological clock is ticking, I'm stressed out, I want to have a kid. Maybe they don't even have a partner and they just want to get ready. What would be some words of wisdom you would impart on them?
Yeah. So the first is to test your hormones, and that is like completely contrary to every conventional doctor out there, who's going to say, well, if you haven't tried for 6 to 12 months, you don't really need to test your hormones. That's dumb. Like, our hormones are kind of indicator light of what's happening inside the body. So test your hormones. It's not a big deal.
And what are we looking for when we test them?
Yeah, we want to test FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, estradiol, luteinizing hormone and anti-Müllerian hormone. So there's 4 that are like baselines. They should ideally be done on cycle day 3.
Okay.
And those will give us a clue into what it is that's happening under the surface or with our hormones in general related to fertility. And those, like, there's a whole ebook that I have about it. So if we can like offer the link for anyone that's listening, that's like, what do I do with these hormones? Because my doctor's not telling me what to do with it.
Certainly. And just to interject here, your book's called Fertility Secrets, What Your Doctor Didn't Tell You About Baby Making, which is
that's
super helpful.
Yeah. That's my book, which is like a super deep dive, but there's a lab test cheat sheet, we call it, which just tells you like what is happening with your hormones based on your numbers and how to like interpret what's going on. Because most of the time that I talk to women, they're like, how come my doctor didn't tell me any of this?
Right.
And it's like, well, they don't have that lens. They're looking from a completely different place.
Thanks for listening to the Rebel Love Podcast, the podcast about love, sex, and relationships. If you like this episode, please support us by subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform, and find all the details of this episode and more at rebellove.com/podcast.